Welcome to the Tudor Dixon Podcast. I'm Tudor Dixon, and it is great to have you tuning in to the podcast today. I have a special guest, and what I love about this guest is, first of all, I've been to a lot of events with Republican governors, and all of them surprise me about how inviting they are and how kind they are. And I've always imagined those folks like surrounded by security, untouchable, not willing to speak with you. But they all do, especially my guest today. He's one of the first governors to take time to talk with me about my race when I ran in Michigan. And every time I see him, he takes time to chat. And I'm so glad he's joining me today. Governor Kevin Stitt, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Oh, it's my honor. Thanks for having me on, Tudor. And we followed your race real closely, and you made us proud.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Now you're following another race, though. So I want to jump into that. I know we have a short amount of time with you, but we have all been watching the presidential race, and you came out with a big endorsement for Governor Ron DeSantis. So tell us a little bit about why you did that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, first off, I know Ron. I know really all the people running, and I watched him lead during COVID. And you don't know the pressure on governors during that time period. And when we were being pushed to do mask mandates, and me and Ron were one of the few governors that refused to do a mask mandate statewide. We kept our states open. And I just saw what a leader he was, how much pressure he was under, and how he was kind of the point of the spear as the national media was attacking him. He never backed down. And so then I look at who can beat Joe Biden. We have got to win the White House back. And I think Ron DeSantis is the right guy. And when we do get back into the White House, we need someone who can win and who can be there for the next 8 years. And so for all those reasons, I think we have a winner in Ron DeSantis, and certainly support him for president.
Well, there's been some folks that have said they thought he waited too long. They didn't think his rollout was great. There have been some concerns about some of his events with his teams and whatnot. So give us a little bit of insight into the Ron DeSantis, like him as a person that you know that we don't know about him, and why you think that he is going to surpass everybody else.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, you look at the fundraising. He's got the resources. He's got the fundraising, and that's just people being critical. He had millions and millions of people tuned into his launch, and it actually crashed Twitter. So that's a good thing, in my opinion. But I saw him with his wife. His wife is wonderful. Casey's great. And I saw him with his 3 kids. And he's just a dad like all of us. We've got Father's Day coming up this weekend. And I saw him with his 5-year-old and teaching him how to catch the baseball. And his 5-year-old's got a really good arm. And I know Ron is a huge baseball fan. And so
that's right.
It was so fun watching him out there. And I've got 6 children. And so we've got day jobs, but also we're just trying to be good husbands, good fathers to our kids. And man, just respect the heck out of him. And but I'm just telling America, he is the right guy. He's a leader. He can beat Joe Biden. He's never going to back down, and he represents our values and our conservative values of freedom and faith and country. And we've talked about this. We don't put the Constitution in the attic just because somebody in Washington, D.C. tells us to because there's a pandemic. And so that's what I believed in Oklahoma, and I know that's the way he led Florida. And I believe we need a governor that's ready to lead on day one, and that's Ron DeSantis.
Okay, so you talked about being a dad. That is where I want to go next, because you signed a bill that I find very important as a mom, the Save Women's Sports Act. That to me is key. You hear just this week, I think it was, the press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, was asked about protecting women's sports, and she said that was calling transgender kids dangerous. Why did you sign it, and how do you think that you can convince other folks that it is really genuinely loving and caring to support women and protect their sports?
Sure. I mean, I signed that bill last year, and probably the most, my favorite bill that I signed all of last year, because it's so common sense to us in Oklahoma, and I think for most Americans. And it basically just says that boys are going to compete against boys, girls are going to compete against girls, because it's a fairness issue. And you don't know how many college athletes and girls and women came to me, and little 14-year-old volleyball players and soccer players. and just thanking me. One young lady that had a scholarship at the University of Oklahoma on a track team, she just said, "Governor, thank you." She goes, "I am getting a job as an engineer now. I would have never been able to go to college without my scholarship. And the fact that you protected that, and you know that you believe in fairness and fair competition," she just said, "that just means the world to me." And so we forget about, we're not against any one person, but we know what fairness is. And I'm not going to let a biological male who is different than a female compete in sports against them. And so, again, total common sense. The Washington Post interviewed me and were like, they were asking me like, "Man, I cannot believe you signed this controversial bill." And I'm like, "Hey, it's not really controversial in Oklahoma." And some people in the liberal media just don't understand it.
No, I think that's true. And I think that if you go across the country, you would see even in polling that it's not really controversial. Most people say, well, wait a minute, give women a chance. They fought really hard to be able to do this. Let them do it. But I think what you said there is so key. You had a young woman come to you and say, "I wouldn't be able to go to college without this." These are people who they're getting up at 5 a.m. to be in the swimming pool. They're going out, they're staying on the track late with their friends, with their teammates. They are putting in the work, and it's not okay that biologically they don't have the same advantages as a man. You shouldn't be taking away their future because they're putting in the work, really, not just for the sport, but for opportunities outside of the sport for careers.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the other really champion in this issue is Riley Gaines. And if you talk to her, She came by the Oklahoma Capitol. I got a chance to hang out with her. And just an amazing story that the male that she competed against in those swimming events swam. This is something Americans need to know. For 3 years, he was on the men's University of Penn team, was ranked like 450th in the country, flipped to the women's side, and was ranked number 1 in the country. And so, again, that's the discrepancy. He was 450th on the men's side, flipped and started swimming as a female, and is ranked number 1 in the country. Again, if you just look at this on its face, it's nonsense. And I think Americans know it. And again, this isn't against anyone. I mean, we believe in freedoms, but we're not going to turn over and all of a sudden say that there's not going to be a fair competition for our wonderful young ladies that, like you said, get up at 4 or 5 in the morning and are fighting for that scholarship and fair competition. It just makes common sense to us in Oklahoma for sure.
Yeah, it's not against anyone. It's actually for a group that has fought before and is now fighting again. Another issue that I would say is not against anybody, but it's for people, is education freedom. So tell us a little bit about Aspire.
Yeah, so my biggest piece of legislation I got passed this year was, education freedom in Oklahoma. And the last 4 years, I've put more money in public education than the last 25 years in the state of Oklahoma. So I'm the education governor, and we're going to promote teachers. I gave our wonderful teachers a pay raise this year. But at the same time, there's some schools that aren't thriving, and some kids aren't thriving in those schools, whether they're being bullied or maybe their parents think that they're getting in with the wrong crowd, and they just need another option. And I tell people that school choice should not be just for the rich. It should be for every single citizen. And so we passed a scholarship, or we call it a refundable tax credit, where now any parent, regardless of income, has between $5,000 to $7,500 to go to a private school, a Christian school, a Catholic school, any school of their choice where that parent feels like maybe that's a better option for my kid. And what is the government doing? Really, when you step back, why would the government stand in the way of parents' rights to choose where they're going to send their kids to school? We don't believe you should be stuck in a zip code school in Oklahoma, and we're trying to inject some competition into our education system.
I think that when you've had this big win, Iowa, Arkansas, we're seeing this, Florida, we're seeing this spread across the country. I think that COVID really pushed parents to say, wow, I might I might need a different option. They saw different things happening in their schools. Their schools were closed down. They needed to get their kids back into a school that fit their child. And it changed the world in a certain way, because there have been people fighting for education freedom for decades. And all of a sudden, we've seen this massive switchover. For those who are critics of education freedom, how do you combat their concerns? Because oftentimes I do think it's a lack of fully understanding the opportunity for all people, not just, I mean, like you said, they'll say, oh, this is just for the rich, but it's really giving everybody an option.
That's exactly right. A lot of the rural communities said, hey, well, there are no private schools in our area. Then there's nothing to worry about. But I tell people, if you're getting your kids college ready or career ready, you've got nothing to worry about. You're going to be attractive. But what about that failing school? What are we doing with that school district that has high dropout rates and low test scores? And a lot of times they're in a very, a poor area of town and minority area of town, that these parents feel like they're stuck. And I'll give you an example. I had so many parents call me during COVID. We 98% of our school districts were open, but we had one large school district that was closed for 355 days in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Wow.
And those moms called me and they would say, Governor, what am I supposed to do? My first grader is not learning how to read on Zoom. You remember that? It would just break your heart. And my kids were in school the whole time. But that's the hypocrisy of there's some blue state governors that closed their public schools down, yet their kids were in private schools in person when they were saying it wasn't safe. And so I never want that to happen. We have open transfer. And now that mom, if a school district decides to close down, God forbid, they need options to move to a school that is open, that's going to be, and who knows a kid better than their parent? I believe God gave kids to parents, not to the government. So let's break up the monopoly and let parents choose what's right for them.
Well, it's funny to me because one of the arguments that I'll hear is, well, some parents won't take their kids out of the failing school. And I think that the same people who are telling me let parents decide are complaining that some parents won't make that decision. Well, okay. So then it does force the school to say, if we end up with a school that has kids that are not meeting the requirements, I mean, if you had a business and you were making 75% scrap parts that you couldn't use, you wouldn't continue doing the same thing. We have to at some point force some of these schools that are not graduating students to look at themselves for some self-reflection and say, we've got to do something different to help these kids.
Yeah. Tudor, I'll tell you, we've got a charter school in Oklahoma City called Santa Fe South. They have 4,000 kids in this charter school, and they have multiple elementary schools, and there's 1,000 on the waiting list just to get in.
Oh, wow.
And so we want more charter schools. I just set up an aviation school in Norman where if you're a junior in high school and you want to be an airline mechanic, or if you want to be a pilot, you can start going to this special high school. By the time you graduate, you're an A&P mechanic. We need to rethink our education system to say when kids graduate from high school, they should be career ready or they should be college ready. And I think Europe does that so much better. I've studied what they do in Germany, their trade schools. When these kids graduate, they've already had internships. They already know what company they're going to go work for. They already have a skill that they know that they're ready to go become, go work in, like, for example, in the A&P and become an airline mechanic. So we need to think through that. Not every kid's going to go to higher ed. So when I say more options, I want more schools like that aviation school that are specific for the big factory or the big company that are coming into to Oklahoma right now.
Well, and their kids are overseas. Oftentimes they're studying for a specific career. And so that's starting when you're 14 or 15 years old. In fact, even in India, there are parents who get really involved in math and science because they believe that those are the best careers for their students. So they have school and then they have tutoring outside of school, which I think is kind of interesting because it sort of forces parental involvement. And that's one of the things that I've had people say, well, you can't make parents be involved. Well, in certain situations, you can kind of bring parents together in a different way that maybe hadn't thought that they needed to be as involved. I think even in our school, I see sometimes the parents are more involved and sometimes the parents step back and then the teachers step in and they say, you have to help study. And sadly, I actually learn things when I help my kids study. I'm like, how did I miss this in school?
No doubt about it. I mean, listen, that's back to my fatherhood initiative and the things we're doing in Oklahoma on fatherhood. When we have moms and dads involved in their kids' lives and they're working together and they're investing in their kids, they're focused on what is the best outcome for our children. That's the best scenario. And so we know that. Unfortunately, not everybody has that. But the more we can promote moms and dads being involved in their kids' lives, the better off we're going to be. Our teachers have a tough job, and that's why we gave our teachers between a $3,000 to $6,000 pay raise this year, because we want to promote that profession. They give back to that next generation. That's so important. But yeah, the more we can encourage parents, moms and dads to be involved in their kids' education, I think the better off we're going to be.
Well, I want to switch now to business, because I think one of the coolest things is that we have a lot of governors who came from the business world, who became very successful in the business world and then decided to leave that and serve. And that can be a hard thing. I think it's really hard for us to get people to serve in their 40s and 50s because it's that prime time in their career. But you are one of those people that came from the business world, so successful, and you've brought that expertise to Oklahoma, and you're bringing businesses to Oklahoma. Now, right now, we're in this place where we're seeing people across the country that are concerned about bringing other countries' businesses, especially China, into the United States. You've been successful finding allied countries and bringing businesses into Oklahoma, but also recruiting local American businesses as well. Tell us what is the secret? How do you do that? And why is that so important?
Well, thanks for saying that. When I took over as governor, we were having billion-dollar budget deficits. We had no money in savings. And we just finished my fifth session. We have a $6.2 billion savings account now, which is amazing. I cut taxes for Oklahomans. We've gotten rid of about 25% of our regulations. We want to be the most business-friendly state in the entire country. And so it's working. And then also, you can see the picture behind me. Everybody thinks of Oklahoma as huge oil and gas. We're so proud of that. We're like number 5 in the country in oil production and number 3 in natural gas. But we also are leaning into renewables. We are number 2 in wind energy production now. We've got hydrogen in Oklahoma. So that's all led to the most affordable, reliable energy grid in the entire country. So in other words, 11 out of the last 15 quarters, it was the most affordable cost to the consumer. So if you add all that up, a reliable grid, an affordable grid, affordable electricity, and then you think about our pro-business environment, our workforce, and the arbitrage we have, meaning our cost of living is 400% less than California and on the coast, then companies are flooding to states like Oklahoma. And so that's what we're excited about. We just landed our biggest company ever in eastern Oklahoma. We've got a bigger one than that we're on the 1 yard line with. So Oklahoma is becoming the place to be. We're top 10 in migration, people moving to our state because they saw what happened in California as they were shutting things down, and they saw what happened in other states. And so now people are loving our pro-business, pro-freedom policy. So I think a lot of it is just getting out of the way and making sure we're clear with the rules, but we never play gotcha with businesses and let businesses go compete. That's all businesses want, is they just don't want the government picking winners and losers or picking their competition over them. Have a level playing field and let the businesses go compete. And that's what they find in Oklahoma and Texas and Florida and Tennessee and some of our states.
You've done great things. You're getting a lot of press recently. I mean, as these bills have been signed, people are starting to say, what's happening in Oklahoma? Before I let you go, what is the future for Governor Stitt?
Well, it's an honor to serve as the governor of the state. So I've got 3 more years and then we'll see what happens. But man, I'm just cheering on right now, the Republican Party and trying to promote our values. I've sent 100 troops to the border with Governor Abbott in Texas because, I mean, we could talk about that for the next 30 minutes. The abdication of duty from the federal government, the Biden administration, to open borders. I mean, when did open borders and securing our country become a political issue?
It's crazy.
So when did energy independence become a political issue? Every president of the United States since 1978 had an energy independence policy. Like, hey, let's meet the needs of our own citizens with our own resources. And now Biden tries to cancel the oil and gas industry and tries to have to buy from our enemies. It's just nonsense. And so we need common sense in Washington, D.C., and we're excited to take our country back. And we need ladies like you stepping up in Michigan, and we need to turn Michigan red again.
Well, that's the plan, and I know that you will help us any way you can. I'm so glad you came on today because I really want people to get to know you. I hear the passion in your voice. I don't think that 3 years is enough, so we're going to recruit you for something else, but I appreciate having you here today. Governor Kevin Stitt, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Tudor.
And thank you all for joining us on the Tudor Dixon Podcast. For this episode and others, go to TudorDixonPodcast.com. You can subscribe right there or check out iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And make sure you join us next time. Have an awesome day.